Hey, we're here at historical marker number 4 for the day. This is the 5th one. This is Blue Mountain Forts. This is right here in Harper's Tavern. There's a whole slew of like 4 of them all here in one place. And sorry once again for the noise for the traffic. It says here in 1763 to 64, from a line of 6 log house stations to the north, settlers were defended by the Paxton Rangers, volunteers paid by Pennsylvania's provincial government. Fort Hunter was on the Susquehanna just north of Blue Mountain, and the other 5 stations were just south of the mountain, located at regular intervals over the 23 miles between the river and Swatara Creek. A similar line of stations had existed 1756 to 57. So I wanted to talk about a couple of these because you had a couple gaps. Straight out this way is where Indiantown Gap is. That was one. To the west of that would have been Manada Gap, and then to the east of that would have been Swatara Gap. We've actually been to Swatara Gap in an earlier video, and we actually talked about Fort Swatara. Fort Swatara defended the Swatara Gap. Fort Indiantown Gap obviously took care of its gap, and in Manada there was a Manada Fort, which Fort Manada, that took care of Manada Gap. There's also not far down out this way was Reed's Fort, which that may be one of the log houses that they were talking about, because there were the 56 to 57 Fort Swatara would have been in that group of forts, but there were a whole bunch of forts, and then like the Tulpehocken Path, the first fort there would have been Fort Henry. So at some point we will visit these forts. Cliff has been doing a series on the French and Indian War about these forts, but I do want to, at some point, I would like to do a series on these forts because they played a really important, intricate role. This is actually a really cool place. I want to stop here at some point, and I'd like to be able to film here because I'm not quite sure what the age is, but it's an inn. But they actually do say it has some haunted things about it. Once again, sorry about the noise. I don't know what it is about today. Harper's Tavern isn't normally this busy, but it is just nuts. It's a Sunday afternoon, so I guess that makes sense. But anyways, that is then the Blue Mountain Forts historical marker, and we will be visiting a whole bunch more of these, and then we'll go more into detail talking about these different forts, of what purpose they served. One of the things I did want to mention is a lot of these forts, they do mention like log houses. A lot of these forts were not what you would think as traditional forts, like say your Fort Sumters or Fort Niagara, where these were, places that were huge forts where they had maybe 100 soldiers there or something like that. These were not that. These were, Pennsylvania was run by Quakers who were pacifists, so they didn't see the point of a militia. So a lot of these forts were, sometimes like Reed's Fort, for instance, which I talked about down along Route 22, was basically the guy's house. A lot of them were that, and they'd be able to keep like 15 soldiers. They usually tried to keep like 5 to 10 miles in between each fort, and but they would they'd serve their purpose, but it was a lot for these guys to be able to try to take on because it was such a vast territory for them to cover. But they were there. A lot of times the churches served as not necessarily forts, but as sanctuaries for the settlers. If they were able to get forewarning from these soldiers that, hey, there's an attack coming from Native Americans, they were able to make it to these sanctuaries or these forts and be able to stay safe. So this was an area that was, at that time, was the frontier of the United States. So with that, I will say goodbye once again, and we will see you about town. Thanks, everybody.